Welcome to the space where we connect people to people that have similar life challenges. And to date, we have over 10,000 downloads. So I want to welcome you to your space and welcome you home. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Lori before we dive more into this lighthearted icebreaker. So I shared a little bit about Lori's background and as a social worker and empowering group facilitator. Um, Three words that they you tend to use to describe Lori is engaging, collaborative, and creative, right? She's passionate about empowering parents to foster positive and supportive home environments for their children with mental health disorders. So that's what we're going to talk about. And keeping in mind, this comes with over 2 decades of experience, but also she has 3 kids. So she has lived experience, right? So this is not just expert experience, but it's lived experience that we're going to get from. So Lori comes with a vast amount of experience and extends for a variety of places in the mental health field. But the other thing that I would like to point out is if you look into rooms, she has a spectrum of rooms that she actually focuses on, like narcissistic relationships, which include recovering from a narcissistic relationship, breaking free from narcissistic relationship patterns, new beginnings, and beyond narcissism. So, but that's not all she talks about. Free for basically be free to be me, and this is after separation or divorce. So there's numerous rooms that you can join. Some tomorrow, and some the day after as well. So I just want you all to have a chance to check her out. But Lori, we talked a little bit about the first option that you chose is just keep swimming. But now I have two more that I would like to ask you to share, right? And then we'll go right into the time that you just dive into what you would like to bring with us today. Okay, Lori?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, all right. So, Lori, team sports or solo activities, which one do you think is better to building your children's confidence? Team sports or solo activities, and why? Share the why too.
I chose team sports, and I guess that one just stuck out to me because I think that when kids get involved with other kids and they learn how to be a team player, it helps build confidence.
And I would also say, would you agree with this also with the parents too, right?
Yeah,
You yeah, you make friends that you probably never knew you needed after that long wait in traffic, and then finally you get to the game and they're giving you all the updates on what's happening as if you didn't miss a beat. And you're like, I think I like you. You're a good person to have around. So I love, 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 love team sports. That's also why I love group facilitation. Now, I want to ask you another question, and this comes more from an aspiring lens. And Heather, feel free to write your option in the chat as well. We're looking to engage you in the conversation too. The next one would be mountain climbing or deep sea diving. Which adventure best symbolizes your approach to overcoming parenting challenges? Choose one and why.
want me to go?
Yes, please.
Okay, I chose mountain climbing. Um, and that is because I've kind of looked at there was a post on Facebook one time, and it was a mama polar bear going climbing a mountain, and that she had babies following her, and the babies kept sliding down. And so that just kind of came to my mind when I saw the mountain climbing. But the reason I liked it was because every time you start climbing, things can happen and you slide back. But you have to get to the top of that mountain. So you have to keep climbing.
I love that. I love that. And I think Heather's agreeing with you as well, mountain climbing. And I love that analogy, that metaphor. We need to just keep climbing. And sometimes, to be honest, right, as we take that hike, sometimes the scariest part is when you're so far up and then you finally notice how far down the
Yes.
fall would be, right? So it's that interesting journey. But I love that fact that we have to just keep going, because we'll eventually make it to that side.
Right.
And my final question for you, and I see Heather, you're writing in the chat, fear of deep water. Ooh, yes, Heather. I think we resonate with that too. I was basically in the chat, Lori, Heather put there's a fear of deep water. So that's also why she's leaning more towards the mountain climbing.
Oh,
And yeah, interesting story. I learned how to swim and I can't remember which summer, but we had summer activities to because there was no summer school during this time. And short version is they placed us. This was at the community college. They placed us at the 12-foot diving board, and they pushed us off basically. And it was like sink or swim. And now when I think about it, now in my field and things that I go through, I'm like, what sane person would do that,
mm,
right? And who would give them the authority and to do such a thing? Because we could have died,
very,
right? Oh
wow.
my goodness, yeah. So.
Pretty
Uh,
scary.
It is, it is. So with that being said, let's go to this aspect of the final question. So this is going to be comfort versus positivity, right? So we're going to move from the scary part, and we're going to get a little bit into our comfortable, the most comfortable part of our lives. So both Heather and Lori, I want you to think about this aspect, but specifically, Lori, think about imagine you sinking into the most comfortable pair of shoes you own. All right. And for me, that might be barefoot, but shoes, color shoes, right? And think about feeling the soft cushioning beneath your feet and the relaxing support that they provide. Now, I also want you to think about the second option, positivity. Picture yourself embracing a positive word, one word that encapsulates your hope for 2023. Okay, so which option resonates with you more with where you're at in life right now, comfort or positivity, and why? Go ahead,
Well,
Lori.
well, for me, the positivity stuck out. Um, I think we can get comfort in things that aren't. We can get comfortable in things that aren't good for us, but and get
Mm.
stuck. Like I said, I've been stuck. And when I think of positivity, that's how I got unstuck. I just started really focusing on positive and challenging my negative thoughts and really, convincing myself that I can do anything I want to do.
Mm. Heather, you and Laura are twinsies here. She's also agreeing with positivity in the chat. There's so much commonality here, and that's the beauty of being on circles, right? We can know each other, but we can get to know each other even more. We can have this profound, deep introspection based on some of these questions. And I'll leave with this final question. Heather, Lori, and I just had like a short powwow, and so I learned a little bit more about the burgeonings of her faith and her background. And so I want to welcome Charm. You're coming at the right time, Charm. You're familiar with our this or that, and this would be our final question. We're welcoming Lori, one of our dynamic group facilitators, to this space. And there's a question on my favorite podcast, Lori. It's by Krista Tippett's the On Being podcast. They have a slew of foundational things that they do, but the crux of it is to espouse how does love show up in the world, right? And one of the questions that often surfaces in her discussions is about spiritual upbringing of her guests, right? And feel free to self-select. I believe in self-select. You don't necessarily have to answer this question, but the point of this question is also to journey with you as a parent, right? So, reflecting on your journey as a parent, Lori, could you share how your spiritual upbringing, in particular, the spiritual upbringing of your childhood, shaped the parent you are today?
Such a difficult question. So
Mm,
there. Let's see. I would say, when I think of spiritual, I think of church. And we were in church. I was going to church regularly as a child, but I really didn't get it as a child. And that my spiritual religious aspects came to me around 2001 during 9/11, and I just kind of went to a different place. And then when I think about being a child growing up, and it wasn't so much that spiritual, but it was my mother. My mother grew up without a mother and really didn't have much. And She was very poor, and her grandmother raised her, and so she had such a loving, giving um, personality. And no matter who the person was, she was open and giving and non-judgmental, and so that was um, my important aspect of being shaped to be a better parent and to continue to learn to be a better parent.
I love that. I love that. And I also heard the tone and the difficulty, right? That you also had to learn what it meant for you as an individual, right? But at the same time, knowing that there's these good attributes that I can carry on into and want to actually empower myself, but also my children,
Yes.
right? So Lori, I've already had a ton of, in my opinion, it was a few minutes, but it felt like a lifetime to get to know you, and I found a lot of much more commonality. So my hopes is that as we dive a little deeper into the practical aspects of empowering parenting for our children with mental health disorders, in these next 20 or 30 minutes, that people hear, whether it's Charm, Heather, and Heather, I also placed Lori's room that I think is in particular to you recovering from a narcissistic relationship in the chat. The link is in the chat. And anyone that's interested, I definitely would recommend you chiming into Lori's room. She doesn't just help you with that specific aspect, but you just heard her talk about sometimes just challenging those negative thoughts, those self-limiting beliefs. So, and check out the reviews. You don't have to take my word for it, but you can take the words of your peers and join the room and find out for yourself as well. But Lori, here's what I would like to ask as we're going into this conversation. Um, Share a little bit about, you told me you have three young men, right? And you told me in the very beginning, the early burgeonings, they were diagnosed in a way, but later on it showed up differently. Do you mind elaborating on that? Then also then sharing anything else you would like to share with us. And at the end, we'll just save at least 10 minutes for Q&A, or you can take questions as you go.
Okay. So I have a master's in social work, and I worked many years in the field, and the majority of my experience was connected to working with kids. And my first job in the field was working with foster care youth who were in a foster care program. So I worked with the foster care parents, and I worked with the youth, and I worked with the biological parent who was also involved in that whole process. And it was very insightful. I learned a lot from that. And then over the years, I've worked with kids in lots of different settings. So I've learned a lot of things about kids and how to approach kids, how to talk to them differently, how to empower them, encourage them. Um, and when I say, and I said it too in my, I think it's in my bio or whatever, but being creative, I just never give up. It's just like, okay, so this doesn't work. I got to think outside the box. I got to figure out another way to approach this. And that's what I learned as a parent and as a social worker, that, you can't just manage all the behavior the same. Every individual is unique, and comes with different issues and different behavioral issues. And so you have to find a way to encourage and empower them. And it can look different for sure. Um, I think that one of the things too that is that in the foster care system is a lot of times the diagnosis was never made. Like they didn't get that help, they didn't get that support. They weren't the foster parents weren't knowledgeable enough how to empower and encourage kids, so that it was a lot of negative aspects of how they worked with them, which was really difficult. I remember, like, even, in the foster care system, I worked with the Department of Social Services a lot because kids would be placed into a foster care home. And then if the foster parent couldn't deal with the issues or the behaviors, they would uproot them and send them to another home. And no warning, nothing. They would just show up one day and they would tell them to pack their things. And I just was so devastated by that. Like it was like, wow, I can't even imagine living a life like that. But imagine what that can do to a kid, and how, that there's so traumatic. And so, looking at what they experienced and how it caused them to go where they ended up. So those are important things to remember. And trauma, and a lot of times in my groups I'll even talk about trauma, and how a lot of people won't think they've experienced a trauma, but trauma can look so different to everybody. A kid being bullied can be trauma. um, Parents divorcing and separating can be traumatic. There's just so many different aspects of trauma that really can affect how you behave and how you think. I think that with my kids, I had already worked in the field, and then I learned that there was some issues there. My first son, who is now 36, but when he was 2, I started noticing some things that were different. And it was just like, like he was so active, overactive, couldn't sit still, run, run, run. He didn't walk till like he was a year and a half. And then as soon as he started walking, it was like running. He couldn't run, or he couldn't walk. He had to run. And so I learned that this something was a little different than other kids his age that I saw. He had a hard time kind of managing his moods. He would get upset and just really act out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this normal? Like the temper tantrums and that kind of thing. He had difficulty with. And he had like even difficulty when he was young, age 2, like sitting down and coloring. He would color for like 2 minutes and he was done. He just couldn't stay focused on anything very long. And so early on in school, he was diagnosed with ADHD. And we got support through school, and that's a whole nother topic. But if anybody has any kids that are in school who aren't being supported, who aren't getting help, that's quite the process. A lot of times you can talk with the school, and some schools are really good about helping kids, and other schools are very they're more worried about their budget, and they don't have people to support your child. But you can, as a parent, is one thing I always tried to tell parents as I was working with them is you can put it in writing, give it to the school, and that you want your child tested to see if there is a learning disability or something else going on. And they are, by law, they have to do that within, I think it's 60 to 90 days. It has to be done, and a meeting has to take place with you. And the thing that parents didn't know was that it needed to be in writing. So if they talked to the school and they said, hey, my kid's having some issues, I really want some testing to be done, they could drag their feet. But as soon as you put it in writing and you deliver it to their door, they have to do it. So that's one thing I like to share all the time about that part of it. Because once you get, and one thing you learn when you're dealing with the school system, you have to be the most important advocate for your child. And you have to be strong and fight them in certain areas that aren't going to be helpful. Like I know one year they wanted to stop. They had did a IEP, which is an individual education plan, and my son was doing a little bit better, and they wanted to drop the plan. And it was like, okay, it's just so 6 months out of the whole period, he's doing a little bit better, maybe because he's getting the support and you want to drop it. And I fought them on that. And so they kept it another year, and he did struggle again that next year. So you have to be that advocate. You have to, just like in any of the other groups that we do with the whole, like in the narcissist groups that I do, it's like, you have to educate yourself. You have to learn about narcissists, and you have to learn about what it is to be a victim, and you have to learn about how that looks, and you have to learn all these things. Well, when you're working with children who have a disability or a disorder, you have to educate yourself. You have to learn more about it. I know, like my spouse at the time when I was going through all this with my kids, was not very understanding, wasn't very positive, and was fighting it constantly. Like they just need to listen, they just need to mind. And when you're working with a kid who has a mental health disorder, you have to understand the mental health disorder. So why aren't they listening? And that's what you have to really look at. You have to be asking these questions. Is this normal behavior? Are these things that I need to bring to somebody's attention? Um, I even have like a checklist that I brought to kind of go over, like as far as like warning signs and how to recognize certain behaviors, and are there things going on. Um, like the frequent temper tantrums, like they're having temper tantrums all the time. They're not able to kind of regulate their emotions. So that's a little bit more than a normal temper tantrum. Unusual fears. One of my son wouldn't let me close the window in the summer. Um, or open the window in the summer. And, his fear was he was worried somebody was going to crawl in the window. Nothing's ever happened. Nothing ever happened to us. Nobody ever broke in our house, but he had that fear of somebody coming through the window. So on hot summer days, I couldn't open his window. So unusual fears and worries that are, not something a child that age would usually be fearful of. Um, and like I said, just busy, busy, busy all the time, hyperactive, constant movement, not being able to sit down. My one son, we let him stand at the dinner table. As long as he stood and he was quiet and he wasn't disruptive, he could stand, and he would eat his dinner standing. And then I remember even talking to one of the teachers at school about he couldn't sit still, and he's constantly shifting around and not being able to focus. But if he was standing, he could focus. So that one teacher that year let him stand at his desk. She got him a tall desk and let him stand there and do his work. So that's when I come back to saying that you have to be the advocate. You have to push for these things, because it won't happen. A lot of times it won't happen unless you're pushing. Um, Difficulty participating in activities, difficulty making friends. One of my sons had real lot of difficulty making friends, and he hung around with his younger brother most of the time and his friends. But I really wanted him to learn to make friends with his peer group. And so, talk to the teacher about, is there any kind of group um, assignments that you're going to be doing that he could get involved with somebody. And so she hooked him up with one of the kids who had just moved there, and they became best friends. But it was like having to go to the teacher, talk about what's going on, and see if there was a solution. So advocating for your child, talking to the school, very important. um, Other things too, like a disorder could be depression. One thing that I learned working with kids, and I had one child who went through about a depression. um and it can look different in kids. When we think about depression, we think about, we just feel sad all the time, or we don't feel like ourselves, or we don't have a lot of energy, or um, we just don't feel like doing anything. And that can be similar with kids, but it also, I found with working with kids, a lot of times those were the kids who were had these really bad attitudes and these really, big outbursts, because they were so angry and they were so upset because of the depression. They just didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know what was wrong with them. And a lot of times when you're working with kids with these disorders, um, they feel like something's wrong with them. They're comparing themselves to other kids, and the other kids don't seem to be struggling. Why am I struggling? Or why does this kid have all these friends and I don't have any friends? So they look at it, and it really takes a toll on their self confidence, for sure. Um, with the depression, frequent physical complaints, you know, just not feeling good, feeling flu-like. A lot of times that can go along with depression. Um, I know one of my sons, I thought he had a hearing problem, because he would come home and we would go to do homework, and with all my kids, homework that should have took 10 minutes took hours. Um, and I even talked to the school about that. And so they decreased the amount of homework that had to be done and brought in daily. But they did it. They just couldn't do as much as what they were giving them. Um, and so, homework would take hours, and trying to find fun ways to do the homework. I remember trying to make it more interesting and more fun. And so it really goes to positive parenting. Let's look at how we can make this work. I remember doing hangman with spelling words, like how can I make this so they will get into it, and they'll be more apt to stay focused on it. um I go back to physical symptoms. My one son, this is in high school, would call me daily. He had a definite problem with social anxiety. He was the son that didn't have a lot of friends. He had that one friend, but in school he was bullied a lot. And he would call me daily saying, "I'm having a heart attack. You got to come get me." And I would go, and we would talk, and so like I was there to support him, and I was trying all the time, to the point where he just refused to go to school. Well, as a parent, if your kid doesn't go to school, then you have this truancy issue, and then they're calling child protective services. Your kid has to go to school, and when you got a teenager, how do you make your kid go to school? You can't pick them up and carry them in there. So right back at, you got to be an advocate. You have to really advocate and talk to the school, and figure out if there's another way. Which I ended up doing online schooling for him. I pulled him out of the school. We did online schooling for a while, and then we tried to go back to the school. We worked on some things. He saw a therapist, and we tried to go back to school, and it continued, and he just wasn't comfortable. And he ended up, the school had a program that was like an external program that he got involved with, which was very similar to the online, but it was more that there were other kids around. I wanted him to be able to get that social aspect of school too, so that was challenging for him. um but yeah, there's just so many things that go on that we don't even know how to deal with, and so you have to read about it, you have to talk to other people, maybe even therapist for yourself, like, because when, as a parent, you're going through all these challenges, and this is the one thing that I remember all the time, um, is that you're going through all these challenges, and you've got other people saying, "Why aren't you doing this? And you should do that." And they don't get it. They don't get what it's like to raise a kid with a mental health disorder. It doesn't look the same, doesn't feel the same. And as a parent, it's very challenging. And like I said, you have to be really creative, because something might work this week, and then in a month from now, it doesn't work. So now I got to think about another way to approach this. So it can be very challenging. And it's very hard to not blame yourself, and to not feel like you're doing something wrong, or beating yourself up because your kid does have this problem, and he's not like everybody else's kids. And um so it can be very challenging for a parent, and it's so important to do the whole self-care for a parent. Make sure that you are talking to somebody, and that you have support, and that somebody is helping you with this challenge, and it's not always all on you, because that makes it difficult too. As I was going through the whole process of parenting three kids with ADHD and anxiety, I became a single parent, which made it even more difficult. And the lack of support, and not having somebody there to back you up, because it's so important to take time for yourself and to do that self-care. And how do you do that when you're a single parent? So that was a difficult challenge for me. um it isn't easy, and you have to be creative with that. Like, I would watch, uh, well, it was my cousin, but I would watch their kids, for an hour, and then they would watch my kid for an hour. So like we would do trade-offs. But just being creative, how can I figure this out, so I can have some time to kind of re-energize and regroup. um let's see. Some of the difficulties parents experience when they're parenting kids with mental health disorders are the judgment. Like I said, people judging you, you're not doing it right, or why are you doing it that way? um People just not really understanding what's going on and how it looks. um Kind of, it takes me to that saying of what goes on behind closed doors, we don't really know, and they don't really know what it's like to parent a child like that. um it can this is a big one too. It can impact the family dynamics. So if you are in a relationship, and the child has a disorder, are you agreeing on it, and are you fighting about it? Does it put a toll on the relationship? Which it can. um and it can also take a toll on the siblings. So I had three sons, and two of the sons were very challenging, um daily. uh daily challenges all the time. There was just always something going on, and I was always focusing on them. And my youngest son, who also had anxiety and stuff, but wasn't needing that daily attention, um, really struggled with that because he wasn't getting the focus he needed. And I was trying, like I would try as best I could, to give him what he needed, but he felt that. He felt that, their issues were more important, or, more needing to be focused on. Um, and he grew up, not ever, he was the child that I had that didn't really speak up and say a lot. He kept a lot inside. Um, and then after he graduated high school, he came back one night and we had this long talk. And I didn't even know that's how he felt. Um, because as a parent, you're doing the best you can, like you think you're doing the best you can. And I'm really doing all these things. But he was right. My focus was on those other two because of the behaviors that they were displaying and the difficulties. Um, the one son got involved with some gang stuff. And so, like, I was all over the place with that. And then the other one, like I said, he wasn't going to school. It was just like something all the time. Um, so that anyhow, the difficulties and the challenges, can range from many different things. The emotional toll that it takes on that you take on, the struggle and the draining and never having any energy for anything else because it is a lot of work. The homework that takes 10 minutes is taking hours, it's not like you can just go do your housework. Um, the financial strain, for therapy, for anything else they may need. If they need tutors, I've done that in the past where we've had to get some tutors to help them because maybe I didn't understand the work well enough, or the math, because my math doesn't look like their math. That's what they used to always tell me. That's not how they do it in school. And I'd be like, but that's how I know to do it. And then the advocacy challenges, like I said, that can be challenging, to advocate for your kid in a school setting. You go into these meetings, you say you want your child tested, and they do these testing, and then they have this CSE meeting, and it's like the certain group of people in the school district come to the table and talk about what's going on for your child. And there's probably 10 people sitting at that table and you. And so it is very hard to advocate for your child if you're feeling intimidated. And those meetings are very intimidating. Sometimes, they come in and they already have the plan all figured out. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. So going back to that, the advocacy, um, and the impact on siblings, I talked about that. And then looking at their future. What is their future going to look like? Are they going to be able to go to college? Are they going to be able to get a good job? How do I help them and get them to a point where they can do well and be successful? So those are things that we worry about. But tips for parents is educating yourself. Communication. This is my highlight. Communication is key. When I've worked with kids over the years, doing therapy, I've worked in a middle school for years. I got a lot of difficult kids, and some of the staff at the school would say, "Oh, good luck with that one." That's real encouraging, isn't it? And what I would find out is this: nobody listened to them. And then once the kids started talking, it was like I didn't have to hardly say anything. They just never had anybody that listened to them. So one key tip for parents is being able to listen without interrupting, without judging, without telling them what they should do, but just listening. That to me is like the most number one for me. That's what I learned, the communication. And I always say that even in my other groups, so that, communication's key. We have to be able to communicate. If you can't tell somebody how you're feeling or what's going on for you, nobody can help you. So communication is key. Supportive environment. Other thing I learned working with kids too is that the praise is so important. So I would ask parents, well, what's a child's strengths? I don't know. Because of the behaviors, they couldn't see the strengths. So then I would start pointing them out. Well, I see this and that, but you have to like pick up, even if you can't see them, you can find something. There is a strength there, um, and kids start feeling as they're going through these difficult challenges themselves that they don't have any strengths, and they don't see it anymore. So we have to be the ones that show them, and tell them that, um, wow, look how calm you were when that happened. That was great, like showing and praising them for what they do right. So that's real important. Routines are important so that they have stability. They know what to expect. Um, Encouraging independence. So, we'd go into a store and my son would want to know something about a certain how much this cost or do they have more, and I would encourage him to go up and ask instead of doing it for him, to encourage independence and to build a self-confidence. um, Building the support network is really important. A lot of times I know in our community we had it was called it was a support group for parents with kids who had mental health disorders. So there was a group that could get together and talk about different issues their kids were having, and get the support, get ideas, which was really helpful. And then remembering every child is unique, and you have to tailor your approach to that child's special needs and strengths. And when you're talking to a child that has, say, ADHD, um, are they able to remember what you just told them? Are they able to recall it when they go do it? Do they need more detailed information, maybe a step by step? It's just important to read up on different disorders and understand what they need and where they're struggling. Um, with ADHD, it's not being able to sit still. It's not being able to focus, not being able to pay attention. Um, it can be they can be very impulsive. They don't know how to stop before they do something. They don't stop and think. They just do it, and they're very impulsive. Um, so knowing what the symptoms are huge. Um, Going back to anxiety, it looks very much like ADHD. And that's where I thought my kids had the ADHD, but they really had the anxiety. Is that symptoms of anxiety? It can be, kids can't sit still; they're moving constantly. They can't sleep. ADHD can't sleep either. Avoidance, both anxiety and ADHD. They avoid things, and as they continue to not do well in school, if we don't catch it early, as they continue to not do well in school, um, they feel like they're failures, and then they give up on school. And there's a high percentage that drop out if they're not getting the support they need. And the schools, like I said, if they have these meetings and they can get an IEP, which is an individual education plan, they have a modified plan for them in school, which could be a hard copy of notes because they're not good at taking notes and they can't state. Well, part of the problem with ADHD is you're slower at processing information, so as you're writing it, um they're way ahead of you, the person that's talking, and you're lost. Oh, and that's what I was going to say about my one son who came home, and I thought he had a problem with hearing. He could never tell me what he learned, and I kept going, well, they must have covered it in school. Like, what did they tell you? I don't know, I couldn't hear her. And I'm like, hear her? So got his hearing checked. It wasn't his hearing, it's the processing information. And that's how they'd explained it to me. It's like if you're giving a spelling test, and he's on the first word and she's already on the third word. It's not that he didn't know how to spell them, because we would play hangman and he would get them all, but he was failing these tests. And so it wasn't that he couldn't do it, he just couldn't keep up with um that processing while she was doing it. He would get behind and then be lost. And then once we got help and he ended up going on medication, the teacher said that, it was like night or day. He was just a whole different kid. And I don't ever push medication for people. It really depends on where they are. And if they're able to do it or not. Like if they're really struggling and they're failing, maybe the medicine will help them learn some skills, be there, being able to focus better. And then there are a lot of skills, like when somebody's doing a lecture, and they're talking, you can be taking notes. Maybe you don't have to take notes, but maybe just, hitting the highlight words, you can be writing them down. So yeah, organization, that can be another one of ADHD, and focusing, but it can also be anxiety. If you have anxiety and you're worried about all these things and you can't settle down, you're not thinking rationally and you're not thinking clearly. So that can be part of it too. And then depression in children, like I said, that can look very different. You can still have difficulty concentrating, and you can have those physical complaints and the social withdrawal and low self-esteem, irritability. That's where people get, they see somebody, being disrespectful, and they just think there's something wrong with a kid, like they blame kids instead of looking for what's going on for that kid. And then, a lot of times people talk about just symptoms of behavioral issues with kids. Maybe there isn't a disorder, but maybe the kids are acting out because something else is going on in their life. So that comes back to the communication. We got to be talking to them. And when they're young, they're not, I find a lot of times they don't even understand the feelings. So we have to be teaching them feelings, and we have to be working on, getting them to communicate and verbalize what they're feeling. And sometimes you have to do that, and you have to maybe even play games with that. I've had some games that I played with kids doing that to help them recognize feelings. But there was something else I was going to say. Okay. I was just kind of regrouped here. I'm kind of babbling. So has anybody experienced, different behaviors from the kids that made you wonder? Or does anybody have kids with mental health disorders?
Yeah, I think in the chat, Heather shared earlier that she has a son with bipolar. Yeah. Um, and let's see. I'm trying to go back to the chat real quick, you all. Sorry. Yeah, and I think she said that she also has her own difficulties that she's dealing with, and and so she resonated. We both were saying that we were resonating with this, and I think what resonated most was the aspect of the judgment and the self blame
Yes.
from the chat. So I guess the question I would have, and she might be writing. Let me just check. Yep. Okay. Um, and and please excuse my ignorance. Can you share? Do you know what the DMDD stands for? Oh, disruptive mood dysregulation. Is
Yes.
that is that okay? Okay, I think okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so her child is 15, and so she's been dealing with that, and all the while, just trying to similar to you, and I believe Heather. Yeah, Heather also said she herself has bipolar and severe depression and anxiety. And I can't even begin to imagine how she grapples with that, with the self blame, right? So,
Yes.
what would you say to Heather in regards to what she's sharing and what she's having to deal with, how to manage that self care component, but
Yeah.
also that communication component that we're talking about, especially with her son being a teenager.
Yeah. How old was the child?
15.
15. Yeah, that's a hard age too. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for one thing, I want to say too that a lot of the disorders, and anxiety, depression for sure, bipolar probably too, can be hereditary. I have anxiety. And that's why when my kids had anxiety, it was like, oh, that makes sense. Everybody in the family has anxiety. So just understanding that aspect. So what you go through is similar to what they go through. Um, you have to be aware of the symptoms, like I said, and um, you have to remain calm and get them to open up and talk to us. What I would do a lot of times would be, I would start talking to my kid, and they would start sharing. I was better with other kids than my own. They would start sharing, and then I'd be telling them what they should do or how to help them instead of helping them figure out what to do. So we have to kind of step back sometimes and just listen. What are they having difficulty with? What is hard about it? Like sometimes if you really start what's the word I want? Dissecting something, and you start pulling things out, you find out there's something deeper there going on. So talking and communicating, building strong relationship. Do you spend time alone with them? Do you do something that they want to do? One of the things I learned back when I was doing foster care, and then I carried on with my kids, was positive time, we called it. And at least 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day of positive time with each kid. Doing something they want to do, even if we don't like it, like even if it's a video game, doing something. Don't take a call, don't do a text. It's totally focusing on them. That's why we call it positive time. So that can build self-esteem. It can build a closer relationship because you're really focusing on their needs and what they want, and they see that you're interested. Also, one thing that was always hard for me was allowing the child to experience distress and failure. As parents, we want to jump in and we want to fix it. But we don't always really know what needs to be fixed without that communication also. And then as children and adults, we experience failures and we experience difficulties and challenges. And we are the role models. We as parents are the role models on how we handle those situations. So if, we get upset and frustrated and we start throwing things around, that's what our child's learning. If we remain calm and try to take a time out for ourselves, okay, I need a time out for a minute. I need to calm down and then come back and talk calmly. We've taught them that sometimes we just need to take some time to breathe, to get into a more rational mindset before we come back and talk about it. But as a parent, I know I'm kind of skipping around here. As a parent, I think that you have to do the self-care. You have to be talking to other people about what you're going through. You have to find time to do something that's enjoyable for you. You have to really work on those that negative dialogue that's going on in your head. And kind of, I think I was saying, like when we are getting judged or somebody saying something about our parenting, it's judgmental, and we become defensive because we're like, in our heads, we're doing the best we can. We're doing, we're fighting this challenge daily, and we're doing the best we can, and we know we're doing the best we can. But then we can also question ourselves because things aren't working, or it's not working, or it's getting worse, or we have to challenge that. Okay, so why is it getting worse, and why am I feeling so defeated? Maybe I'm feeling defeated because I'm not taking care of myself. Maybe I'm feeling defeated because I'm not getting enough sleep, because I'm up, late doing the housework because I've spent so much time with my kids. Or we have to look at the reasons behind the negative dialogue. Or second guessing. Like I said, we know we're doing the best we can, but somebody's questioning us, so that makes us guess makes us guess that we're not doing the right thing. um, making healthy choices, eating right, sleeping right, getting exercise. Exercise can really be helpful to help us feel better. Getting involved in a support group, education, educating ourselves on how to parent these difficult children that are giving us a lot of challenges. How can I approach the situation differently? I know I did a lot of reading and a lot of books and a lot of looking things up. Okay, so this isn't working. What can I do differently? So there is so many aspects of parenting a child with a mental health disorder, and I'm just trying to like put all this into one thing, and it's just so difficult.
I mean, no, you're doing.
I'm
I
jumping everywhere.
No, I think you're jumping where I think your heart is leading you to go, and I shared in the chat that this is a very convicting conversation for me, and the sense that I resonate deeply with it. And one question that I want to circle back to, and then I'll go to Charms as we're wrapping up at here. And Heather said this has been an extremely helpful conversation. Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Bernard. There's this aspect of what you talked about the support group that you found, or and I shared with Heather, they possibly found you. But the core question was, how did you join that support group, and also what were your expectations going in?
Um, to learn from other parents, because I believe in brainstorming. You bring a bunch of people together and you talk about an issue that somebody's having, and you can come up with all different ideas of how to approach it. Even in our groups here at Circles, I feel like that. Somebody's going through a difficult time, and, other people might have suggestions. Um, or ideas, and so we take all those suggestions and ideas, and then we pick what we think might work for us. So I think you can learn from other parents, you can learn from educating yourself, but when I believe in the power of groups, I always have. I think when you bring a bunch of people together, you can learn so much from different people, and you can learn a lot about yourself even in groups, because I think it brings out an aspect of who we are, and we forget that, and one of the things I say all the time too is that I think in our society we lost that sense of community, and in Circles I feel like that's community. We come into these groups and we have um a bunch of people in this group that are supporting each other and building each other, and there for each other, and I think it's awesome, because I think support is huge. And when you're going through challenges, whatever the challenge is, um, I think it's important to find supports in your area, supports that you can, um, people you can talk to about these issues and understand, because they're going through it too. Um, and it helps the parent, reduce that stress and anxiety if they feel supported and they're able to talk about it. I think it's a very important topic. And even if there isn't a mental health disorder and there's just behavioral issues, is there a way to approach it differently, more positively? And I think that is just important to learn so that we can be the best we can be. And nobody's perfect.
Yeah. That's true. That's true, Lori. Nobody's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect parent.
No.
Yeah, I love that. And the final two things, and I know we're over time, but this is good. And if you do have like 5 minutes, and if you all here have 5 minutes, I definitely want to kind of share Charm's question. And Charm, if you want to unmute and share a little bit more, I know Heather said that she couldn't, and so I'm just reading those things in the chat. But we definitely would love to hear from you. And I know part of Charm's journey, but I don't want to trivialize everything. So I want to, if you do want to add, feel free. Oh, she can't talk, so she put it in the chat. So I'll share what I do know is this aspect of transitions, and then also having to parent on her own. And she shared that her son has trauma and irritability, which is a big thing,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of components that you talked about, but knowing that that their son is adjusting, Charm is adjusting. Charm also shared the overwhelming burden of like what you shared, this parenting on her own, but also the self blame, right? Or feeling like she needs to do more, but not. And here's the core one of the core questions Charmed had, Lori. Like, I want to do more, but I don't have the capacity even to do for me.
Yes.
So what would you say to Charm, knowing that her son is experiencing trauma and irritability, but sometimes she doesn't have the capacity to be patient? That's how
Yeah.
she would describe it. Go ahead.
I would say that if you're feeling so drained and you don't have the capacity to do what you need to do as a parent, then the focus is definitely on you at the moment. You have to take care of yourself so that you can give your child more. You know what I mean? Like if we let ourselves kind of go down and we're not taking care of ourselves, then we can't be the best we can be because we're struggling too. It's kind of like that when you're in an airplane, put on your oxygen first before you help your child because you have to be the one that can help them because they're not going to be able to figure that out. So we have to take care of ourselves, and that is why I wanted to do this group because I know what it's like to feel like you're not doing a good job or that there's something wrong with me or um there was periods where I was just so stressed that I couldn't think clearly. So you have to take care of yourself and am I going through something that I need to maybe find what in your here, Charm, so that's huge. And that's what I always say to people, you're here in circles, which means you are looking for the answers and you did come here because you needed support. And that's a step, and that's a step in you helping yourself get to a better place. And it I'm not sure how long you've been with circles or how what you're going through, but um when you're parenting a kid and then there's difficulties, it's not like you feel like you even have time for you. But you got to take it. You got to take that time for you because you're important too. And you have to do whatever you have to do. And a lot of times people say, I don't have time to do therapy or I don't have time for this. But now, since COVID, there's so many online things. There's telehealth where you could do it. I do it with parents. I do telehealth with parents that they're home and their kids are right in the room, like so, or they're in the next room or whatever. It makes it more available and flexible. So that's another thing to think about, just talking to somebody individually to kind of figure out where they where you can go to help yourself. What steps do you need to work on to feel stronger and more confident? Um,
Hmm. And
it,
and and she shared more context. Lori, do you want me to share the context in the chat?
yeah,
Okay. Sorry for cutting you off.
you're
But
good.
did you? Oh, okay, okay. I didn't want you to lose that thought. Charm said her son is 5 and um, had a uh, covert narcissistic father, and they also experienced poverty through homelessness due
Okay,
to the domestic violence situation.
right.
Her son was victimized as well due to bullying in the shelter and was touched inappropriately. So
Oh,
her question is the core question is, what can I do to help him thrive?
to help him thrive. Um, is he, is he talking about it? See, I don't know. It's hard to ask questions. Um,
Yeah, that's a fair question. Yeah.
yeah, is he talking about it? You want him to open up and be able to verbalize what's going on for him. And if he isn't, there's different ways to really go about trying to get him to open up. Sometimes with kids that aren't opening up and they're not talking, playing games with them sometimes, like I get more, or going out to eat with them. I used to love when they were able to allow us to go out and eat with kids. Like there was money for that back in the day, but there isn't anymore. um I could sit down at a table in a restaurant with a kid and I could get him to open up. So maybe being even away from home and being in a different environment, would he open up? um asking him like how he's feeling about things. Can he identify what he feels? um can he identify what he thinks about it all? I think that trauma's a tough one, and we don't want them to. You don't want them to bury it, because when they bury it, they're not working on it. They're not healing from it. So you definitely want them to be talking about it in whatever way they can. So just encouraging them on a daily basis that you're there. And maybe you just have some, maybe like that positive time. Like I said, we're going to spend some positive time just sitting here, and maybe you play a game that has something to do with feelings. You can look all sorts of things up online, and come up with different ideas. Um, or even doing faces of feelings, like with somebody who you said 5, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And she's also asking, so she you're spot on. Like he's when she tries to uh kind of start the conversation,
Uh-huh.
he's not talking, he doesn't necessarily open up, he like fidgets and changes the subject, which is going the direction you're saying. And also the question is like, will play therapy help?
Yes, I think it would. um Sometimes with kids, I when over the years when I've worked with kids, then they won't give me details of something that happened, and what I've done is like a storyboard. You know what a comic is? Kind of past
Hmm.
all that, but comic strips that we used to see in the newspaper, kind of like that. There's a storyboard is kind of like, say there's 12 squares on a page, and you ask them, okay, so you were here when this happened, tell me where you were. So you draw a picture of where they were, and then who was in the room. The next square is who's in the room. The third square is like, um uh what was being said during this time. And then, like if you break it down into little things, like little sections of the story, you'll find out so much more information, because they don't remember all that. They're trying to block it out. They don't really remember all the detail. And if you break it down like that, step by step, they start recalling what happened, more detail to it. But if he doesn't want to talk about it, that's because he's not feeling comfortable right now. And, maybe just starting with something small, like having him identify how his day was. How did you feel about your day? Like, okay, this is what I did today. Um, were you stressed at all, or say you had a bad day? What were you feeling when that happened? Getting them to identify feelings, just keep them talking and keep being there as his support. And and at 5, they're having a hard time identifying feelings. So teaching them about feelings using the faces, you know, draw, and you can print those out too, like a sheet of different kind of faces and the feelings. And um, you can talk about, um, you know, sad. What does it look like to be sad? And what does it look like to be hurt? Or what does it look like to be frustrated, or scared? Or, like getting to identify the feelings, and how did that situation make you feel? Just even if it's one word.
I love that. I love that. And Charm, I hope that this is he was hearting while you was talking the entire time. And the other thing, and I'm as we close out here, Lori, I'm sorry I'm taking all's time, but these are those things again, you all, that's too good to be kept for yourself. And imagine that we're getting all of this in this space. Um, and the beauty of it is no one's rushing you. You're showing up in this space. You're getting what you know you need in this space. And Lori, I'm hoping that this is also healing for you because Lori's talked about parenthood, mental health, self-care. You've all raised questions about your own struggles and your own challenges, but also the beauty of your journey. And one thing that pulls out for me as we kind of the one thing I would add, if I may, is what I learned is that as a parent, we're looking for kids to open up either in the way that we opened up or the way we think they should open up. And what I had learned, and it was just an evaluation experience, Lori. I'm actually doing it about because we in this space because I look at structural racism and how it affects communities of color. And in this space, at this Boys and Girls Club, there's a lot of things that are going on. People are not opening up, but for some reason through art, the kids were just like telling stories. Like that storyboard is really what resonates. And then when I had a chance to interview one of the artists, at least the lead children artist, the mother was like flabbergasted. She was like, "What? She's talking to you?"
Yeah.
And she's never. And I'm like, "Well," and then the mother said exactly what you said. The mother realized that she needed to educate herself to realize that she's been talking this entire time through art, right?
Yep.
And so it's also what you're saying is like, how are they communicating? And I love this aspect of positive time practice, like doing what they want to do, and also forcing us to learn. One thing Bella talks about, Lori, is sometimes we need to learn how to be a child again as parents,
Yeah.
right? And that in itself is important. But I'm going off tangents. But the one thing I really wanted to say first off is thank you. And then I wanted to share this last ask of you. And I know you've done so much, you've shared so much. But based on our time together, right? We went from mountain climbing, right? Now that we've gotten down, we're tired. We've gone, we've accomplished a lot. We feel invigorated to go and take on the task, right? Um, but what is that one piece of advice you would give to Heather, Charm, Denard, and even yourself in this space as we move on through the week, especially with the holidays coming up? There's a lot that's going on. There's some re-traumatization that might go on. There's family members that still don't get it, that might say something, right? What would you say to us as we're entering into these holidays and our kids are in these spaces where, just like Charm said, there's this adjustment period. There's still this not opening up, and then just like Heather said, I might still be feeling guilty that I could be doing more, right? What type of advice would you give to us as we close out today? What's your final piece of advice?
Um, Take care of yourself. Give yourself grace.
Mm,
Because you are here and you're trying to figure it out. Be kind to yourself and um, be the advocate for your child, even in those family spaces. Setting boundaries, that I'm not going to accept this for your child. They will see that too, and that'll be huge.
mm. I love it. And by Heather, we're actually closing out now. I love it. Be kind to yourself. And I wanted to be kind to Lori as we end up, you all. I'm giving you a heart, Lori, right now. And I hope you all can give yourselves a heart. Lori, I want to thank you for your time. Heather and Charm, I want to thank you for your time, your presence. And what I hope is that you take something that can carry you on into your journey with hope, with love, and with perseverance to remember that not only are you the biggest advocate for your child, but you're also the biggest advocate for yourself. But
Yeah.
now you realize you're not alone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank,
Bye.
thank you.
Amazing, Lord. You all have a great one.
You too.
Wow.